Hello there, and thanks for joining us on another exciting edition of the program CEO's Chat. This is the entrepreneurial platform where we bring business leaders, corporate executives, entrepreneurs to discuss everything business. And of course, thanks for joining us wherever you are. We hope you're having a wonderful time, and also always ensure that the COVID protocols are maintained. There's COVID in Liberia. We're doing everything possible to ensure that we stay safe, that our families are safe. And as usual, on CEO's Chat, we discuss business, but today we're discussing Liberia's business, the business of our country. We'll be talking about the history of the founding of Liberia, a relook at the founding of Liberia. There's been many controversies and many speculations around the founding of Liberia. Some people said Liberia came as a result of American colonization society, a group of some might say bandwagon Christians who came to get our resources. There's another theory that states that Liberia was actually in existence before 1822, before the coming of the ACS, and all of that. And owing to the quote-unquote gullibility of our society, many of these rumors and speculations have survived over the years, and our history hasn't been well preserved. There's a young gentleman who runs an initiative in Liberia. This initiative is called Libpedia. They chronicle Liberia's history from the mouths of those who witnessed the history, from the mouths of those who even wrote the history. They also dig deeper, researching all across the world to find the actual history of our country. Libpedia is a non-for-profit business operated by Mr. Ernest Duku Jallah. He's a young, enterprising colleague who serves as executive director of Libpedia. So I've brought him on board to talk about Liberia's founding history because he has researched expansively and extensively in the history of our country. So it's my pleasing pleasure to welcome the executive director of Libpedia here on CEO's Chat. Welcome.
Hey, welcome. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be seated next to you and talk about issues as it pertains to our country. So it's a honor.
And, I've been watching from a distance the work that your institution does, chronicling the history of our country. That is quite impressive. So let's start with Libpedia. What is your recent venture this time? What are you doing now?
Also, we started on a couple of things. One is the Liberia History Project. So we feel like there's a huge vacancy in our history. There's a shade in between what is what we know was in school and what actually happened. So one of the thing is one of the things people have to better understand that people say our history is not written. There's a bunch of history that's not written, but there's also a bunch of history that's written. It's right there. You can buy books, you can find articles and read. So what we've done is we've occupied ourselves with researching. So I and my team, we're not historians. We're just more curious about some of the things that happened in our past because we realized that you wouldn't have a sense of direction if you're not fully educated about where you're from. Mm-hmm. So what we're trying to do is to bring forward history in a simple way. So instead of writing long articles, we do short infographics, short videos, and then educate people on some of the things that happened in the past. So that's precisely what we've been involved with over the past few months.
Mm-hmm. And I also see that you're involved with this Go Girl Lead project. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so the Go Girl Lead is I am a feminist. I am actually passionate about women leadership. I'm passionate about equality for a number of reasons. And so the Go Girl Lead platform is we find out that we've been in the vanguard, on the front lines, advocating for women inclusion, women political participation. And there's been a lot of resources been pulled in that direction. But the thing is, women are either not running or they're running and losing. And that's incessant. It's happening at elections after election. So we figure that this whole thing with women political leadership is a political issue, but it's also a cultural issue. It's a mindset issue. So since men are beating women at the national level, what if we work with girls in their formative years, girls who still, growing, and make them believe, build them with that confidence. So essentially, the program is about training girls who are still in high school with leadership competencies. So we teach them creative writing, public speaking, how to run election campaign, how to start a business, all these things. And then we send them to their schools. Those who are interested in politics, they run. So we have girls, for example, the first female president in Cathedral High Schools from our program, first female president B.W. Harris from our program, first female president in SDA High School. So, and that's exactly what we've been doing.
So you're growing history.
Yes, we're doing history and we're building females.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's impressive. That's impressive.
Yeah.
And hats up to your team and all of the wonderful young men and women.
Yeah, hats up to you guys.
Yeah. So let's dig deeper now in our own history. Liberia turns 174 years next week. And the research surrounding Liberia dates as far back as the 12th century. What has your own documentation proving regarding the early inhabitation of this vast area we call Liberia?
So just to put it in context, if we say Liberia, then we'll talk about 1824. So before 1824, there was not Liberia. There was just different settlements of indigenous tribes. And these tribes migrated, as we popularly learn in high school, because of the disintegration of the Songhai Empire. There was the Moroccan invaders, and then the Songhais, they were defeated, and then much of the people from there started to migrate, look for lands where they were more peaceful, where they can groom their family, farm, and live. And so they started migrating westward. And so that's where you find Basso people in Cameroon today, and some of the tribes in Ivory Coast, and even in Gambia, it's just the same people. Fractions of them started migrating westward, and then they settled on the west coast of Africa. And there where they were, there's not a lot of information on them because they were not educated. They couldn't read and write. And so much of the documentary on Liberia started in the 14th century after the Portuguese and Spanish came toward the coast.
There's this confusion, I don't know whether you've seen it, between the Christians and the Muslims as to who came earlier than, who came first, as to whether the Muslims came first than the Christians. Did your documentation also cover that?
So again, that whole history is not accurate. But what I know for a fact is that the Muslim came before this integration of the Songhai. The Muslim came after the integration of the Mali, after the Songhais invaded Mali. So because Mali and Mansa Musa was predominantly a Muslim empire. So most of them started to leave. So they called the Mandinkas. They actually started. So the Mandinkas actually came before the Kwa speaking people and all the other people. But again, I can't say for a fact that the Muslims inhabited the land before. But what I know, according to what's written in history, is that the Muslim came to the west coast after the disintegration of the Malay Empire, and all those other groups started coming afterward.
The Mendi, the Bas.
So that's a very likely possibility.
Now you spoke about the Malay Empire, the Songhai Empire. What specific role did these empire play, especially with regards to the inhabitation of Liberia?
So what I would say is that without these empires, there wouldn't be any Liberia, and we'll talk about that later on in the conversation. But we have the country now. It's over 90% of people are natives because these empires disintegrated, and the people who lived there saw the need that they needed to live in a place where they would live peacefully. So I don't want to really jump the point, but later on in the conversation we'll find out the linkage in why
So let's go to the Portuguese, the Spaniards, and other Europeans. What role did they also play?
So the Portuguese and the Spaniards, so the Portuguese are actually the first. They were sailors, and you know they actually came to Liberia, or the coast, west coast, not precisely because of slavery. People usually thought the Portuguese came because of slavery. It was not.
That's the popular
Yeah.
mindset that they came for slaves to export.
Yeah, so it's actually Pedro descendants. There's this guy, Juan Portofliga, who visited Africa, and he wrote a lot of places. So Pedro descendants was a sailor, much like Columbus discovered America, started touring the coast, and he started from the Moroccan coast and then came all the way to the west coast of Africa, where he found people, the vast, they lived in small, according to his report, lived in small houses along the coast. And then he also noticed a lot of things. There were lots of resources. There were golds, you know, there were ivory. I mean, resources, we started producing average here in the west coast way more than, before Ivory Coast, you know, so ivory. But crucially, what they found was spices.
Yeah.
What attracted the Portuguese to the west coast was spices, you know, pepper. And people feel like, but couldn't they produce pepper in the country? It's just the same way people in Liberia can leave Liberia and go buy bitter ball to Guinea, you know. So they found out the pepper, the malakita, it started calling the malakita pepper along the coast of West Africa. It was really good for the foods, you know, lots of different spices. So they started to set up trading posts along the west coast, and then sailors started coming after sailors, and then the coast started to expand, started to open. And so, you know, that's how it actually started with the Portuguese discovery of West Africa.
And I think somewhere down the line, owing to how profiteering the trade in spices, they started to bring a couple of their people down to do barter trade.
Most definitely. So it was a really mutual barter trading. So they used to bring guns, swords, and all of that. They traded with the local goods. So there was no money because the Africans, the people along the coast, were not educated. I mean, they what they needed was just food to survive. So when they bring in these things, guns, sometimes clothes, hats, you know, rum, you know, that was one of the barter trade. So rum, all of those things, and then the people gave the local goods. So it actually started off, you know, as barter trade, and then it escalated, you know, later on
into something else.
Yeah.
Okay, you're watching CEO's Chat here on KMTV, and tonight we're talking about the founding of Liberia, a relook at the founding of Liberia. We dig deeper into the history of our country before the settlers arrived, even during the arrival of the settlers, what major contributions they made to the establishment of this place called Liberia. And we also will be highlighting some of the relatively unknown individuals in our history and their major contributions. All right, here on the program CEO's Chat tonight. And my guest is Duku Jallah. He is the executive director of a group that focuses on chronicling the history of Liberia called Libpedia. They are more into digital works, chronicling the history of Liberia and doing a lot of exploit with gender mainstreaming and a lot more about youth participation. So let's get back. We're talking about the Europeans and how the Portuguese came and then saw spices. In fact, they even name our coast the green pepper coast owing to the spices here. Now, let's reflect on the years before 1822, before the quote-unquote American colonization society could come. So the years leading to leading to ACS. What happened?
So a lot happened. So the Portuguese started to trade on the coast, and then the slavery thing started. So the thing with slavery actually started according to written history in Africa, but then it was not in a way that the Europeans took it. So people, for example, I take a loan from you. Okay, told my child grow with you, you know. So it was actually in that form. It was not like people subjugating another group of people. But then when the trade became super intense, and then the Europeans started exporting tons and tons of African goods, the appetite for sugar increased. You know, there was people needed sugar, so they started establishing sugar plantations. You know, and they figured that if we have people from free labor, because running sugar plantations was
labor intensive.
Yes. So they started to, because we already had this mutual friendship with much of these African chiefs, be like, okay, you don't even have to give us goods. We can give you weapons and you defeat, another kingdom, and then you simply give us those who've been captured in exchange for this good. And I mean, some of these African chiefs were lured, and then that's how the slave trade started. And then escalated. And the powerful chiefs were the ones who could conquer. So, I mean, the slavery was actually led by Africans. The Europeans, the most they did was to incentivize Africans, incentivize them with weapons and other goods, and then they actually led the slave by capturing. But then they also there was a chief, here in Liberia, a chief called Solu Duma. For him, he was not actually he was not actually involved with wars because he had his mutual defense pact with Saboso. We'll talk about it later on. But he was like fool people. He was more like into abducting people. There's somewhere in the book written by Dr. Burroughs where he was having something like this talent show, and all the kingdoms around brought all the beautiful girls to dance with him. And they just got all of them and put them on the ship. So it was more like a money making thing, and some of these chiefs saw it as a way to settle scores with their fellow. If I have issues with you, okay, give me a weapon, let me defeat the people and get. So it was beneficial. It was benefiting the Europeans, and then the Americans later joined. But then that was what it was Africans versus Africans. But
so
then
mainly it was started by Africans.
Yes, it was
and
started.
The Europeans just saw
the potential,
just
stayed into it.
Exploit the situation.
So before the colony, before Liberia, a lot of people don't know this, but there was actually should I call it country? Or they call it confederation.
Confederation.
Yeah. So there was the Kondo Confederation. That's the most
organized.
Organized. There was two. There was the Kondo Confederation was more organized than the VAR Confederation, because South Boso, he was
organized in terms of political organization,
commerce. Judy Ashman wrote about it in his book he published in 1825. Just forgetting. But it was organized. It had the whole governance structure. South Boso was the top of that. And then there was also the Gola, the VAS. The VAS was headed by Solu Duma. He was called King Peter. He had the VAR. But the VAR Confederation was not actually a state in the way the Kondo Confederation was. That was just a loose number. He was more like the spokesman for the VAR. He was the person Eli Erich and Robert Stockton dealt with when they came to Liberia in December 1821. So there was the Kondo Federation, and there was the Kondo. They called them the Kondo people. His capital was in Bopolu, and there's the VAR Confederation. They occupied from Butcher Island going all the way to Person Day, New Georgia.
Okay.
And there was another king they called him King George, but his name was Bar Gloro. He was actually occupying.
So the King George sounds like an English name.
Yeah.
Maybe the foreigners couldn't pronounce the Bar Gloro.
So they're conflicting. Some of these kings. Some of the names were actually given to the kings. Some of them requested it because they wanted. Because the thing is, at the time, to be friends with European was something, it made you seem superior. So, a lot of the people there wanted to be friends with. So give me English name, call me, King George. So that was how. So King George also had a really small settlement. It was somewhere around Cape Meshirado, up the Cape there, going to Mamba Point. And then from the side coming to Pincho, there was a Gola. They had a region, they called it Kongba. Kongba, yeah. Okay. So that was how it is. So the people here before the settlers, it was organized. They were doing trade. Cape Meshirado, around, especially the Bushra Island. There was a slave trading post just next to we had the Bali Island. Around the Bushra Island. It was called I'm just forgetting, but it was owned by an American woman called Philippi. But then after the slave trade was abolished, the British came in, they destroyed the slave station, and then another slave chief called Bar Kai. He was the permanent slave. He changed it into just a community. So there was pockets of slave trading going on before the arrival of the settlers, but predominantly the reason why the region was not very tense is because King Peter, which is Solu Duma, the spokesman for the VAR, was friends with Salboso. And they were the two powerful people in the region.
And where was Salboso's territory?
Salboso was, going Lofa, Bopolu. His capital was in Bopolu.
Okay.
So it was so the Golas was between the Pingzhou era, and that's where the Gulags were, and then going forward toward the interior, that was where South Bosa was.
Okay.
So he was not very much involved. I mean, he was just involved. The reason why he was involved with the whole Liberian settler thing is because, I mean, not because you're really sorry for the settler, but because there was the slave outposts around Cape Mercy, right? And he felt that if there was disturbances in the middle, it was going to affect his street. Because he was,
so he had to
he
protect.
was a notorious slave trader, so he had to protect and ensure that the region is stable. So that was how it was. I mean, before
just loose Confederates.
There was not
the Kondo, the Konkpa, the Zulu Doma controlled regions.
So that's how it was before the arrival of the settlers. And I might just want to talk about the whole ACS thing because it's interconnected.
Yeah.
So the whole formation of the ACS, you can extricate the American history from the ACS. You know, America had just ended the Revolutionary War, and the war was fought on the idea that we needed liberty.
Yeah.
And so they won and then had independence, and people started, but you wanted liberty and you still have slavery.
Slaves.
you know. So they were pushed to the wall to abolish slavery. I mean, it was not in its entirety. People were still, resistant to that, but then the nation and Britain everywhere else had, abolished slavery. Britain took the first step.
Yeah.
Those blacks who have fought with the British in the American Revolutionary War, I mean, most of the war veterans, they created Freetown and said, okay, go, so the British were actually the first, to send them to Freetown. And then the population of black people in America started to increase. A lot of free blacks. People became, this slavery thing, I mean, is immoral. Let me release my slave or work for me and pay, So the population started growing. And the population in the American itself of slavery went to 4 million. And then there started to be pockets of different resistance in
insurrections
America.
from one.
And then the thing happened in Haiti with Liberia, There's the slaves. It was a French colony in Haiti around the Saint-Domingue Republic. The blacks outnumbered the white. So one morning all the blacks would go and kill all the white masters and took over the whole country. They said, okay, this is our country. So
and that happened in Haiti.
That happened here. So a lot of the whites in America became really afraid. So they feel like, okay, I mean, this might one day happen in our communities. So we need to find a solution to the slave question. The whole thing with the ACS started with a bishop from Rhode Island called Samuel Hopkins.
Okay.
So Samuel Hopkins he actually thought that slavery was immoral. It was against God. So he actually started the advocacy for the
men should be free.
Men to be free.
Enjoy their personal liberties.
And then when the whole thing with the slave and violence came in, people said, but there has to be a solution. And so that's how Robert Finley and all these people came together. Okay, let's form an organization that will repatriate slaves to Africa. But the American government was not entirely supportive of the ACS. There was but I mean, you needed to make a stronger argument than that. So then Paul Coffey was the one who he was actually an American. He used to fish whale. A lot of people don't know, but the oil, the lantern people used back in the days, the oil was whale oil. That's what they used to use to keep the flares up. So that's the business Paul Coffey did. So
he was relatively wealthy.
He owned a lot of ships, and they used to hunt whale. So when he saw what the British were doing in Sierra Leone, he said, okay, but then this is possible. So he had a number of free slaves from Massachusetts. He paid for their voyage. They actually reached somewhere around 1812, and he died, I think, a year before. And so people started referencing what he did. Said, but this is something that's been done before. So give us some money, and we will, be able to bring slaves. So two motivations. One was Reverend Hopkins and others thought that slaves coming to Africa will be able to, because Africa is a dark continent. Black people come to Africa will be able to spread Christianity. Others thought that it reduces the risk of black violence because, mind you, not all the black people were free. A substantial portion of them were free, but there's still many who are still in slavery. And those who held slave feel that if the other slaves see their friends who were free, they will be, it
will serve as a motivation for rebellion.
So they thought that they needed to substantially decreased. And part of the reason why the ACS whole project was relatively a failure, I mean, there was about 4 million people. It went up to, I think, 8 million. around 1875, and it was just in total 12,000 people came to Africa, Liberia in specific. So the whole thing, American government provided $100,000. The Congress sanctioned that money to the ACS, and in the request, I actually have a copy of the request. Okay. So the request was the ACS actually requested that they want to build an outpost. They didn't really say we're bringing slaves to live here and all of that.
So they did not have any intention of having another country that will inhabit or keep free men and women. They did not have that initial intention. So because if you're saying an outpost, it might just serve as maybe another ground where they could keep these men and women, as often as possible, as long as possible. Later on, they might come and get them again to do some maybe hard labor or use them in the army or for some other purposes.
So I wouldn't say that. What I would say, the reason why they decided to make that argument in my view is because they wanted Liberia to be more like an American colony. Okay. But then America was, there was still, the reason why America was not fully focused on Liberia then was because there was still, this secessionist people, there was still this struggle. In that very after the Liberian independence, America started to fight their own civil war. There's this pockets of resistance to slavery. America was still a very hostile place, so they couldn't manage the colony. So the idea seemed, that's why the idea seemed plausible to them. Okay, all right, 100,000. Let's see what you do with it. So the first group came to Sherbrooke Island. So they actually wanted to establish in Sherbrooke Island. But then America had just defeated British in the war.
So aside from this ACS, the American Colonization Society, were there any other colonization societies that were also involved in the transportation of slaves from America to Africa?
There were many colonizations. What happened was, so the American colonization poised itself as the mother organization, but it was not actually. When the repatriation idea became popular, states started to form their own,
colonization.
Yeah. So for example, Mississippi in America formed it, and they immigrated, sent their slaves to Sino County, Maryland state. Sending their own slaves to Maryland County. Okay. So people started to do it because they saw that it was something that really worked. So the ACS, which was a trailblazer, the original idea was to follow what Paul Coffey did, bring slaves to Freetown. But then they brought slaves to Freetown. They said, no, we don't want to be battled with Americans. You'll find your own place. Get them Sherbrooke Island, but then Sherbrooke Island was a lowland somewhere in Sierra Leone, and the weather was really bad. Back then, the reason why a lot of whites and Europeans stayed along in Africa because even the first agents of the EC, a lot of them died after a few years because the lifespan for Europeans in Africa was just 1 year. Because there's a lot of mosquito, malaria, and science was not advanced as it is. So then, the British didn't want to do any business with Americans, so they sent the slaves to Sherbrooke Island, and it's okay. Later on, because they were dying, they will build a temporary home for you in Freetown. But please find a place. And that's how Robert Stockton and Eli Aries came along the coast that are looking for a place. The first place they found was a place called Trade Town. I think that's the name. But Liberia should have started from Grand Bassa. Okay. Yeah, but then the king there, these guys. So the king there, he said, no problem. I'll give you two conditions. One, you have to pay duty to me, treaties to me every month. Like your people will be here, but you got to pay me every month.
Month you have to give something.
It don't interfere with my whole slave business. So look, like, nah, we can't. In fact,
we actually bringing free people here,
so we can manage that. So the Dozwa Island, actually Dozwa Island was not owned by. So there were these Vagulas and settlements all around, and these settlements, but Dozwa Island was not owned by. So it's more like a meeting spot. It was just like a free land. And back in Africa, and that's the reason why the people started fighting, because even in some places, people were not selling land. So the original intention of the day chiefs, with whom Robert Stockton and Eli Aries negotiated was okay, we're just giving you a space because you say you have people. We're not selling land. Yes, they were giving rum and
something in return for.
But their original idea was, okay, we're just giving you a space. So they found Dozwa Island, negotiated with King Peter, who was the head of the day, and the day dominated that area. and then they brought the settlers, and they came to Dozwa Island. But then
that was the first shipment.
yes, the 8 person from with the Elizabeth brought. I think they were around the people that came to. There was around 20 because they died. Almost half of them had died. So the first shipment was about, I think, 22 persons that arrived in Liberia.
That survived.
Yeah,
That long voyage.
that long voyage. So it took about 30 days from America to back then. So 22 persons in Dozwa Island, but then Dozwa Island is also a lowland. It's right next to the sea, and if they build their makeshift homes, it's always
Yeah.
So then
susceptible to turbulence.
turbulence, all that.
Yeah.
So then the King George now, who lived, King George has his own community around Cape Meshuarado. He's like, so there's a highland. I'm gonna give you a piece of it. Saying there's a highland, and you guys, this area, you're not used to it. Come and build your settlement up here. So you can. So they started to build the settlement. So this is it. In the process of building the settlement, a British. So by then, slavery was outlawed. So if British or American ships find people trading along on the sea, they always try to destroy this and take the slaves and bring them.
Yeah.
So the British ship found this number of slaves on the sea, and they were bringing them along the coast. We heard that the slaves had already started relocating there. So they brought the slaves, docked the ship, and started taking off things. And then the VAR in the area, they had to have anytime ship comes, they like to claim the ship. That's our property. So
It docked on our harbor.
Yeah, it docked on our harbor. So they tried to claim the ship. The ship started to fire back at them, and 2 persons died. That was the problem. So the dear chief said, "Oh, we want to welcome these people here," and they start killing our people.
No more settlement.
No more settlement. You leave our place. And so when Judy Ashburn tried to settle, they became extremely hostile. Say, "We don't want you here." Judy Ashburn tried to. The first agent of the ACS is okay. Let's make an agreement. Okay, no problem. Make an agreement. He was in jail for 7 days. They caught him and put him in jail for 7 days.
The day chiefs.
Yeah. They said, okay, you will agree. They gave him all the things they gave. The goods they gave in exchange for the land. They gave him everything except from the rum. Gave him everything. He said, okay, we don't want you. Got to leave. So Judy Ashburn went back, but then they didn't have the means to take all these slaves and carry them someplace else. So what they did, they insistently moved from Dozwa Island to Cape Meshuarado. So since they were insistent.
And at that time, how many settlers were there?
The second ship had come, the Nautilus, and so they grew around 100 persons.
Okay.
So they built the settlements on Cape Meshuarado, and then the day chiefs became super infuriated. The people, they don't seem like they're gonna leave. So we have to do something about it. So they gathered, somewhere in 1822 in November, and decided that they are going to forcefully remove the people from the land. That's where the twin battle started.
And just before we dive into the twin battle, let's acknowledge that you're watching CEO's Chat here on KMTV. We discussing Liberia's founding history, digging deeper, getting to know the issues surrounding Liberia's founding history. This month is Liberia's Independence Month, so we took time off to talk about Liberia's history a while. Next week we'll resume with our corporate affairs, but we'll be back right after this short break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the twin battle, how the day chiefs, the settlers, and what necessitated the twin battle, and what were the benefits of the twin battle afterward, and how the slave traders and the settlers migrated afterwards. All of that after this short break. welcome back to CEO's Chat, and my name is Wilcom Duncan. We have Duku Jallah, Executive Director of Libpedia, a business outfit that chronicles the history of Liberia and other interesting information about our country. We're talking about the founding of Liberia and all the historical issues surrounding that. We're just looking at the twin battles involving the settlers and the indigenous folks. So let's get back to it.
So the twin battles actually led by King Josh, who would in fact ceded his land to the settlers. He was angry because it seemed like these people would interfere with the slave trade the slave business, and he was also angry that boat had killed some of his people. So he rallied with some of the chiefs around. He went to King Peter. And King Peter, initially he refused to join, but then his chiefs, became very furious. He already said our land to the people. So King Peter, there was King Peter, there was King Jimmy, there was King Governor. All these people, they merged, the force of almost 2,000 men. Imagine that.
2,000 indigenous warriors.
The ultimate objective was to move up Cape Meshirado, dislodge the settlers, and retake the land, like leave our land by force.
Fire and force.
So, but the thing was, they had a inferior weapon, a bow and arrow. And most of the settlers when they went up Cape Meshirado, especially when the hostilities started. Four of the settlers, they went to go fetch water one time. They were ambushed and killed. So they became ready. They knew they had to protect themselves. So when the next ship was coming, or sometimes when they see British steamers along the coast, they're like, "Please bring weapons, gunpowder." So they had
to protect ourselves.
Yeah. So they have 4 cannons along the 4 corners and 1 in the middle, along
Cape Meshirado.
That's where we have Duku today. That's where they were.
Duku.
Yeah. So when the settlers came, there was whole bush. What the colonists they had made friends, and they had a very good friend called Chief Bakia. Chief Bakia was he was actually a slave, but then when the British destroyed the slave station which he was held, he was the most prominent slave, and the owner fled. The slaves were just there, and so he became his chief. He turned into a settlement, and then he became more like the chief. So he was more like, he actually didn't participate in the fight, but some of his people decided to join. But he was more like providing insider information. So the settlers knew that the natives were gathering and that they were coming.
They had first-hand
information. So what the settlers did was all the women in the middle of the settlement, and then the man Elijah Johnson is one man who played he was the head of the the army. Elijah Johnson, his son Hilary Aradowie Johnson later became president. He was actually led the defense. The natives
twin battle.
Yeah, the twin battle. So the natives came, and then the settlers had superior weapon. They repelled the attack, and then they left. A number of settlers died. The whole Matilda Newport thing happened. It reportedly happened, and the thing with Matilda Newport is, so Judy Ashburn wrote a whole book on that twin battle. It's in the Universal Library, and it's he wrote a super detailed, and there's nowhere Matilda Newport. There's a mention of the use of cannon, and Matilda Newport was actually a living person. There's proof that she actually came to Liberia. She was in Liberia during the twin battle of 1822, but there's no account that she fired a weapon using pipe.
So why is that a popular historical myth that there's this strong lady, Matilda Newport, who is seen commanding forces, marshalling the forces and shooting cannons? Why is that?
I think my view is more like a victor complex. Usually history is written by the victors. That's why I told you I'm interested in talking to Chief Jonathan Kawa, because the people who win are usually the one who writes the history. You have to, so they needed to be like, these guys were so lazy that even a woman, had to use a pipe to defeat them. So that's not proving my written history. I written history proves that Matilda Newport was an actual person. She was actually in a settlement when the twin battles were being fought, but history does not prove that she used the cannon to dispel the
troops.
So a number of settlers died. I think 3 settlers died, and the the indigenous abducted 8 children. So there was this in this room. There was Mary Tripper. Mary Tripper was one of the women who
with the flag,
and another woman and a child. And then they entered the room, and then they killed the woman, and then Mary Tripper actually escaped. But then they adopted 8 children. One of them was the second president, Stevie Benson. He was 6 years old when he came to Liberia with his family. And a few weeks, not every month after the twin battle happened, he was one of those who the settlers, the indigenous people adopted and carried. So they had inferior weapon, and the settlers were really prepared, and they were expelled. So they went back and regrouped to 5,000.
From 2,000
to 5,000. They came back on December 1. So the first one was on November 22nd. The next one, they came back on December 1. But why? The settlers were very weary. Judy Ashman, during the first battle, he was the head of he was sick. He was commanding. Elijah Johnson actually commanded the defense. He was sick. He had malaria. So he was in dose, you know.
Jehudi Ashman.
Yeah. And the British team was passing along the coast, and the settlers went and said, we had to come and help us. There was about 5 British soldiers. They had a number of weapons, and then they came when the natives came for the second attack. These British soldiers played a role in helping defend the settlement. So the natives became ready. We can't beat these people. So
they withdrew.
So they withdrew the second time and started to carve out ways. And that's how Bakai, the other friendly chief, decided
who was providing insider information.
Decided to contact Saboso. But I mean, this thing is happening here. Saboso comes, call a meeting with all the chiefs who's fighting, call the settlers and say, what's the issue? Everybody explain the sir. But you finish giving your land and you accept the payments. So if you fight these people, I will come out and I will kill you.
And Saboso
was extremely powerful. So he was like president of the Kondo people in the north. And they all decided, okay, no problem.
So Saboso actually called a truce.
Yeah, he actually called a truce, Saboso. And that's the role he played. He was actually a Mantinka, you know. So he called a truce, and then they decided they still had some anguish, but it's like, I can't beat you. The most I can do is just be mad. So the kids they abducted, they stayed some time with them.
They had to return them to the settlers.
Kids, and then they started living in harmony. When the settlers started getting more weapons, more people coming, they started to control. They used education crucially. They started to adapt native children to teach them religion. When Lord Kerry came, he started taking the churches into the hinterlands, and then they actually use education to subjugate a lot of the natives because they were not educated. So you can't bring a lot of beautiful things. This is how it should be. Folk and religion, and then the natives gradually fell under the spell. When the second settlement was established in Cadwell and later in Clay Ashland, the settlers had around 3,000 people. They were well educated and all of that. And so that's how the whole dominance thing started. Then the move toward independence. So all along the settlers, they've been controlled by agents from the ACS. So when they grew in
these
number,
agents, they're normally selected from America.
In fact, they're Americans, so white Americans. Yeah. So they started to rebel. They said, nah, I mean, it doesn't have to be like this. You can't have Americans control us every time. So a choose of region, they had a colonial council. So America's on top, but they were more like the representative body. We have to regulate all of the decision. And so we had governance, we started setting up structure, and then actual politics started between Joseph Jenkins Roberts. Was it Joseph? It was Thomas Buchanan and John Sears. So John Sears was actually a Methodist missionary. And when people felt that the colonization movement in Africa was actually succeeding, a lot of Christians started to come along the coast. So then John Sears was a missionary, but he was actually a businessman. So he's doing missionary work, but he's actually also bringing in a lot of his business goods. So the colonists, the administration in Monrovia said, no, we have to tax these schools. So he said, no, you can't tax the church. I mean,
Yeah.
it's super immoral.
Yeah.
And so he
The
said, no,
church is above taxes.
it's above taxes.
These are
So-
charitable works.
Yeah, so I mean, he was super when they started having the first colonial council, the second it was actually the third colonial council election. He formed his own party. He said, my party is the anti-administration party. You know, so he wanted to have his own people in the colonial council leadership to defend, ensure that his business interests. That's how the whole political thing started. And then
The whole division
started with bosses actually on the church, and then the little benefits happened.
So what about that little benefit?
So little benefits, Liberia, the American Colonization Society has stopped supporting. So American Colonization Society was actually supporting 3 settlements. They were supporting the Monrovia Colony, the Clay Ashland, and Caldwell. That's the 3 settlements they were originally supporting. But then Henry Clay, who was so the first thing that happened was a big slave. It was actually the cattle rebellion, I think, happened, and then the Americans reflected on what happened in Haiti. They became really afraid, and the biggest consignment of slaves happened that year. That was 600 slaves coming at once. It was always 100, 150, but
small batch of
so 600 slaves came at once, and they ruined the entire cause of the ACS. They needed money, but then Henry Clay, who was on the ACS board, he was a powerful man. He was one-time speaker in the U.S. House of Representatives. He contested against what's the name? One of the U.S. president. I mean, he was actually against his election. And then after he won, he was like, ACS you suck. I'm not supporting ACS no more. So ACS had no money. But the other colonists, Mississippi, Maryland, they were actually actively because they were
supported by their states in America.
Yeah, so they were more supporting, and they were more the religious, groups. They were actively supporting the group. So these groups they weren't even thinking about independence. But then the majority of the settlers were in Monrovia, and so they needed money from trading in the coast. So when ships dock, they want to take duties from you, so we can use to run government. Because they were the big boys. The settlers that came from Virginia and all the other places, they were more agrarian. They were into agriculture, not into all those coastal things. But Joseph Jenkins, Robert Benson, all these boys, I mean, they were actually into the shipping business, And so one a British ship came along the coast called the Little Ben. It was impounded and demanded to pay duty. The British said, no. Kind of a country you want us to pay duty, and there was a point where America actually denied Liberia, and that was the exact moment. So the British were threatening the Liberians to release the ship, and then they wanted America to stay with America. Said, no, we have our own problems. You'll settle your problem. So the British said, but what's your problem? If you don't release the ship, we're going to bomb Monrovia.
Launch an attack.
So in fact, what the British did, they seized 2 Liberian ships, the John Seas. The John Seas belonged to Stephen A. Benson. They seized the ship and another ship. So you're gonna pay all the time the ship stay with you. You're gonna pay all the money we lost. So that was really, I mean, it was a disadvantage. So the Liberians had to budge. I feel like the only way we can do this is to declare independence. I mean, that's the only way.
That's the only way people recognize
our own authority. So they feel like because declaration like telling the whole world, we are a country. If you come in here, you have to pay money. So that was the thing. But then the declaration, the declaration was not a popular position. A lot of people don't know this. If you look at the record, it was 52 to 48.
So the votes were close.
It was extremely in Sino County. Nobody voted for independence. Imagine, because the people felt like, even though the arguments from the Monrovia boys made sense, but it did too. It was also protecting their business interests. They felt like if this shipping business tries, we'll get a lot of money. So that was Roberts, that was Benson, that was Roy. I mean, that's what they were involved with. So it happened. The whole Sano settlement. No. So it was 52-48.
Very close.
For independence, and then the declaration of independence was made.
Plus or minus 4 votes.
4 votes.
Full vote shot for declaration of independence. So the original independence document that was signed. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the support base at that time during the signing of Liberia's independence. how many confederations or other states join in with the signing of the independence?
So the actual event, the actual signing event, it was attended by most of these native chiefs. They were not, they were very much, they were very much helpless at the time. The settlement had become extremely powerful. It controlled
The settlers.
Yeah, the settlers had become extremely powerful, controlled everything. So when the independence happened, I mean, South was in attendance, Zoludoma, all the other chiefs, some of the people from, for example, Gardner, and some other guys. I mean, they were among the original 11. Jacob Prout was actually from Maryland County, the secretary. So it was signed in the Providence Baptist Church. Providence Baptist was actually started by Lord Carey. So Lord Carey was a slave in America, and he had his grandmother named Matilda. She came to America. Her one wish was she should go back to die in Africa. Say, if I can't die in Africa, you must go back to Africa. So when he gained his freedom, he actually used to work in the steamship. He came back to Africa. He was extremely religious, and so
Lord Carey.
Yeah,
the
Lord
Right
Carey.
Reverend Lord Carey.
Yes, he was extremely religious. So he used to worship, with a reverend called Wilcom Duncan. He used to worship right in the church, the Royal Baptist. So when they came to Africa, there were the people. There was not only the people. Usually, there was only the Baptists. That's why the Providence Baptist is the first. No, there was not only the Baptists. There was the Baptists. There was the Methodists. There was all of them that came together. But then the Baptists had already started worshiping together. In
more
a house.
organized.
Yeah. So when they came, just went up Providence Aslan Baptist. So that building is the first public building in the history of the country. Like the first public space. The first session of the legislature was held in that building.
The first section.
Yeah, like in the whole section was held in that building. So that's where the Declaration of Independence was signed. And people sometimes say Liberia is a Christian country
Because of the venue.
Yeah, the
of this,
venue. And
setting
additional to that, if you look at the original text of the 1847 Constitution, there's references to Christianity, but it's not like Liberia this country should be a Christian country.
It's not overt.
It's not overt. It's in the declaration. Part of the declaration was part of the reason why I want to be independence because I want to spread Christianity. But it's not like Liberia is a Christian because much of what we have in the country, much of what was not going to happen without the help of people like Sao Boso, Barkai, and all the other chiefs. They were not clear-cut Christian way, traditional people. So the country, it was established probably on Christian principles, but it was not established as a Christian because a Christian country then is a theocracy. We use the Bible. It's
fair enough. So after that was around 1847.
Yes.
So after 1847, after the signing of the Declaration, as now we're a recognized government, we can run our own affairs. Leadership crisis is the next thing.
Leadership crisis, and the big leadership crisis was between they call themselves the upbringers. So the two groups of people that came. There were actually three groups. One is they're actually mulatto. Mulatto, white. The Africans, but they're white. And there's the darker skin. They were the ones. They were actually the fourth batch who settled in Clay Ashland. Roy and his people. Then the third group was the Congo. The Congo people were slaves who were actually the Portuguese were really insistent. They didn't want to trade. They started. They didn't want it to end. So they were still doing undercover slave trade things. So usually when they were doing it around the Congo Basin area. So when the British capture them, find them doing slave trade, they get these people again. There's a slave trade,
ship them back to
Africa. So
Liberia.
they started calling the Congo people, the people from the Congo area.
So actually, those were slaves that were gotten from around the Congo Basin.
Around the Congo Basin.
And then shipped here to Liberia.
They found their own settlement in Congo town. Started calling them. So the whole leadership crisis thing was. So Barclay had come. E.J. Roy, had come to Liberia. He was actually he was wealthy among his compatriots. He came with $1,000. That was a lot of money back then. He was actually into ship business. So he had come, and Liberian politics then was you have money, you can excel.
Yeah.
and then he became representative. He ran for the speaker. He became speaker in 1 year. He became representative speaker, and then he wanted to be senator, I think, and then he lost the election. But then he went to the Supreme Court. He became, I think, the head of the Supreme Court, one of those on the Supreme Court bench. But he was extremely wealthy and well known, a popular and brash figure. But he was black. He was dark skinned.
Dark skinned.
And so, Roberts and Warner and Benson, they were the big boys. They were actually the Republican Party. They had changed from the administration party. After Roberts defeated Samuel Benedict, Samuel was the anti-administration. Defeated Samuel Benedict. Samuel Benedict, they dissolved the party. Samuel Benedict joined Roberts' party, he became working in Roberts' administration. So Robert didn't have any solid opposition.
Then.
So there was just a Republic. They changed the party to the Republican Party because the Republican Party in America back then was the party that was championing
the cause of abolition.
Abolition. And now it's reversed.
Yeah.
So it's Roberts. But then most of the politics, the same thing that happened in 1980, people felt like the darker settlers felt like the politics, the economics, social life is controlled by these white boys. Shouldn't be this way. So this guy in Clay Ashland called John Good.
John Good.
Yeah, he started the True Party in Clay Ashland. He brought people together. But then Blading had just come. Blading was more like the intellectual. And there's a guy called Cromwell, Alexander Cromwell. They were the intellectual power, but they didn't have money. They were not so powerful, but they had the organizational skills. So they started to run the popular politics of
we will have
in fact the darker settlers became the predominant. So a lot of people that started coming were the darker settlers. So the True Party managed to infiltrate. They started, so as the settlers come, they'd be like, okay, you need to join us.
The True Party.
Yeah. So when the election in 1879 happened, it was 1869. When the election in 1869 between Roy and James X. Payne happened, James Springs Payne happened. But Payne was actually the favorite. He was Roy actually wanted him to win, but
so Roy was
not Roy, but Roberts actually wanted to win. So he was going against Roy, Roy and James Smith. So the election was tense. It was more like the thing we run our politics now. They printed T-shirt. It was virulent. Personal attacks. So in the end, Roy won. But then, before Roy won the election, there was an issue with the votes from Sino. I think it was an issue. I can't remember the specific, but there was an issue, and Roy offered that if they count the votes, he was going to pay. I think it was an issue about money or taxes or something, and so that's how he won. So he won, and then there was an immediate opposition to his government. I mean, because the light-skinned people actually have money and the influence. They run government all along, they control trade.
Yeah.
And Roy was more like trying to disrupt everything. I mean, Roy had his son, Edward F. Ross, Secretary of Treasury. So
he had grips over.
Yeah, he had grips over everything, and so the people. He didn't have a lot of time, and then the thing with the British loan happened. Roy felt like we needed to industrialize fast. He saw the model in Germany and wanted us to copy after the model, industrialize the country as fast as possible. So let's create it from the British. He didn't get popular endorsement, and he went ahead and got the money.
Took the loan.
He took the loan. So people.
How much was that?
I think it was 5,000, 5 million. 5 million. Yes.
To industrialize Liberia.
He actually wanted to industrialize. He wanted to industrialize. He was actually, if you read a lot of Roy's writing, he was and most of these people, the Library of Congress, there's a lot of the writings they have, some of the report. So he was more like a radical. He was a businessman. He wanted to industrialize the country fast, and so. But then there was this resistance to his governance, and so when he got the loan, people said, he didn't get the loan. But then the circumstances around his death is complex. People say he was actually beaten. He was taken from the executive man. The executive man used to be on Ashburn Street. dragged from the executive mansion, carried where they built the two party building right there. See,
Yeah.
that was where he was stoned to death.
That's one
That's
side
another
of the
count.
story.
That's in another count. That's Abayomi Kanga and others account. Another count from Dr. Boris and others say he was actually escaped along with his son, but then he was trying to swim across the river, and then the boat, he was trying to sail across the river, and then the boat capsized. He was the cool sailors found him, in the river. So that's very account. But what happened was he was deposed from office violently.
Without him completing his term.
And his vice president James Smith was somehow complicit because he was more like a radical. He was like, I don't care. I mean, we have to go with this. So James Smith completed his term. Then the Republican Party came back into power, and then they covered up until Anthony Gardner, won the election later on in I think 1887, and then onward the Chewing Party started to govern.
To take full swing.
And that same black issue came up again with the election of Hillary R.W. Johnson. So Hillary R.W. was the first president who was born in Africa, first Liberian president. So when he ran for the presidency, the same issue came up again.
Yeah,
black
this is
man.
our own stock.
Yeah, black man. So then, but then the darker skinned Liberians had become they were about 75% of the population. So the Republican Party felt like we can't go against this. So in fact, the two parties endorsed Johnson. He won, and then he joined the Chewing Party. Okay. And that's how the Chewing Party continued the political dominance onward to the 1980s.
With all of this, our early days, Liberia as a country has a very nice history in African politics, or even regional politics, helping other nations attain their independence. Any information on that as well?
I mean, that's the reason why when people say we've never had good days, I kind of puke, because we've actually had good days. We actually have moments where we should be proud of. And back in the 60s, Liberia at one time was the financial hub of Africa. I mean, you see all these buildings on Ashburn Street. They were Citibank, the Manhattan, Chase. I mean, they were all right here before the Casablanca, before Abuja, before Johannesburg. It was Monrovia. Monrovia was, because we had a really good maritime program, and so all the bankers, they were right here, and Liberia was also seen as a model, and what's possible, an example of black excellence. Yeah. Because before the colonization started in Africa, the thing was, you can't leave because you can't govern yourself. People were like, but look at Liberia, they've been a country for over a century.
Example.
Yeah, and so that's why all these black leaders came to Africa. Mandela,
Nkrumah,
and they came. And Liberia was not only helping them with support. Liberia was also helping the finance. Martin Luther King came to Liberia on his way to the inauguration of Nkrumah. Muhammad Ali, Nelson Mandela, all these people. Asikwe is even argued that Nnamdi Azikiwe, he lived a lot of his life, because when the people became really they became resistant to colonial rule and they've been chased, they always come to Liberia. And part of the reason why, from what I know, that Liberia is not what it should be as an example, like a little above all the other Africans, because Topman was not a liberal in the fairy tale sense of the word. He was more like an arch conservative. He was arch American. He was pro-American to the core. And you can't be anti-colonialism and pro-American. And that's the reason why he had a lot of clash with Marcus Garvey, a lot of clash with W.E.B. Du Bois, because the black colonization thing had become extremely popular, and people thought that Liberia could become the capital of the black, it could be the capital of the black race. That was why Marcus Garvey and UNI actually wanted. They were even tempted to come and invade Liberia because of what's the guy, CDB King and others were very resistant because nah, we're not accepting that, you know. So yeah, like I mean, these were our glory days, and when people, the only thing with it was the wealth was not, you know, it was not distributed equally, you know, but there were systems. Yes, usually a lot of my people, my friends argue when we talk about, because my whole research with Liberia starts with my actual, I mean, where I did a lot of research. Is to actually start with the 79s onward to 19, the Samuel Doe years old, because I actually tried to find it. I mean, we've had all this beautiful, I mean, in 1970, just a year before the coup, Liberia had a GDP per capita next to Japan, 79. I mean, like, that's super massive, you know.
So what happened?
So
How
I've been
did it
asking,
crumble?
yeah, what happened in between this period? You know, there were a number of reasons, and I feel like if we must be able to move ahead as a country, we must commit, I mean, a lot of energy towards studying that history, because that history, most of the things that are happening around today, you look back at that history, 79, 85, you find, you know, an example. So and that's what we've been involved with. But we do actually have a lot of very beautiful history. Liberia was the center of Africa, and the center of China. Golda Meir, the first prime minister of Israel, she was in Liberia. I mean, she spent a lot of time in Liberia. American presidents, before they visited any other country. The first African to enter the White House was it was Bush or Washington, but the first African, it was not Bush or Washington. It was Edward. Liberian president who wrote the Lone Star Forever. I mean, he was actually.
And I'm afraid we ran out of time to get involved with all these wonderful history. And I'm sure as time persists, as time goes by, we'll always have time to share a lot more information on the history of our country, the richness of the history of our country. But it's been a pleasure having you. Let's get your parting comments and then we bid farewell.
Oh, thank you so much, Wilcom.
It's been an hour of exhaustion.
I feel like we're not even going 10 minutes. Sometimes because sometimes you look at these stories and it looks like movie. And you feel like, why we're not talking about this? Why we're not letting the young people know a lot about? But it is our responsibility. A few days ago, I was just sharing with you. I went up to Duku. There's this watchtower. It was constructed in 1838. It was constructed in 1855. Still there, solid, standing. I took a picture. Nobody asked me to pay a dime. So tourism is actually big business, and Liberia has a very beautiful history. If we just commit some resources to telling our history in a beautiful way, and then committing to tourism, all these other things about raising revenue, we can. But crucially, if people don't understand their past, if we don't know what happened before, if we just know it on the surface, we will almost definitely make the same mistakes. So it's crucially important that we prioritize the learning of history in schools, and as well as telling it to children. But it's been a really, really great time sitting and sharing my thoughts on Liberian history, and look forward to another conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. And this is all that we have time for on this edition of the program, CEO's Chat. Next Thursday, we'll return to business and the process of business. We'll talk about personal branding, the importance of personal branding next Thursday. And guess my special studio guest. Stay tuned to CEO's Chat on KMTV. And of course, keep safe. COVID protocols, always observe them, and keep watching. Bye-bye.